The year was 2000. Inside Blockbuster's corporate headquarters in Dallas, Texas, a conference room filled with executives faced two men who had just pitched them the deal of the century. Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph, the co-founders of a tiny, bleeding startup called Netflix, had traveled from California with a simple proposal. Blockbuster would acquire Netflix for $50 million. In return, Netflix would become Blockbuster's online rental arm, handling the awkward, unprofitable side of home video delivery, while the retail giant focused on what it did best, dominating Main Street America with late fees and impulse candy sales. The Blockbuster executives listened politely, then they laughed. Not a chuckle, a room full of dismissive, confident laughter. John Antioco, Blockbuster's CEO, thanked them for coming, but the answer was clear: no deal. Netflix wasn't worth the hassle. It was losing money, had no stores, no brand recognition, and barely 300,000 subscribers. Blockbuster, by contrast, had 9,000 stores, 60 million customers, and annual revenues approaching $6 billion. They were the undisputed king of home entertainment. Netflix was a curiosity, a niche experiment for tech geeks who didn't mind waiting 3 days for a DVD to arrive in the mail. The meeting ended. Hastings and Randolph left empty-handed. But they didn't leave defeated, because what Blockbuster didn't realize, what they couldn't see through the fog of their own dominance, was that they had just refused to buy the company that would obliterate them from existence. Within a decade, Blockbuster would file for bankruptcy. Netflix would be worth $13 billion, and the entire home entertainment industry would never look the same again. This is the story of how the biggest video rental empire in history collapsed because it couldn't let go of late fees. How a debt-loaded giant ignored every warning sign. How a scrappy startup weaponized the mail, then the internet, then original content to destroy a competitor that should have crushed them instantly. This is the story of arrogance, blindness, and the moment Wall Street realized that the old rules of retail were dead. This is the story of how Blockbuster laughed at Netflix, then died overnight. To understand how catastrophically Blockbuster failed, you first need to understand how utterly dominant they were. In 1985, a Dallas businessman named David Cook opened the first Blockbuster Video in a strip mall. His insight was simple but revolutionary: treat video rental like a real business. Before Blockbuster, most video stores were mom-and-pop operations with chaotic inventories, weird hours, and a lingering connection to adult film distribution. Cook professionalized the industry. He built bright, clean stores with massive selections, computerized inventory systems, and family-friendly branding. It worked immediately. By 1987, Blockbuster had 19 stores. By 1989, it had 1,000. By 1994, under the aggressive expansion strategy of CEO Wayne Huizenga, Blockbuster operated over 6,000 locations worldwide. They were opening a new store every 17 hours. They were the fastest-growing retailer in American history, and they were printing money. Here's why. Blockbuster didn't just rent movies, they controlled shelf space. Hollywood studios needed Blockbuster to promote their films. If your movie wasn't on Blockbuster's shelves in thousands of stores nationwide, it didn't exist. That gave Blockbuster enormous leverage. They negotiated revenue-sharing deals with studios that let them stock massive quantities of new releases, often hundreds of copies of a single title, while paying studios a percentage of rental revenue instead of upfront costs. This created a flywheel. More copies, more availability, more customers, more revenue, more leverage with studios, better deals, even more copies. By the late 1990s, Blockbuster was renting 1 billion videos per year. Their brand was embedded in American culture. Friday night meant driving to Blockbuster, walking those iconic blue and yellow aisles, debating over new releases, and walking out with popcorn, candy, and a stack of VHS tapes. But there was something else Blockbuster was renting: guilt. Because embedded in their business model was a psychological weapon that generated nearly $800 million per year in pure profit: late fees. Late fees were genius. They exploited a simple human flaw: forgetfulness. Customers would rent a movie intending to return it on time, then life would intervene. They'd forget. The tape would sit on their counter for a few extra days, then a week, then 2 weeks. And when they finally returned it, they'd face a $5 or $10 late fee, sometimes more than the original rental cost. People hated it, but they paid, and Blockbuster executives loved it. Late fees represented 16% of Blockbuster's total revenue. That's nearly $1 billion a year for doing nothing except enforcing arbitrary return deadlines. For a company carrying $1 billion in debt from its rapid expansion, late fees weren't just profit, they were financial oxygen. But there was a hidden cost. Late fees poisoned customer relationships. Every time someone paid a late fee, they felt a flash of resentment. They didn't blame themselves for forgetting. They blamed Blockbuster for being petty, for profiting off mistakes, for charging them $7 to return The Lion King 3 days late. Surveys showed that nearly 70% of Blockbuster customers had paid at least one late fee in their lifetime. And nearly half said late fees were their least favorite part of the Blockbuster experience. But Blockbuster didn't care. Why would they? Customers kept coming back. Where else were they going to rent movies? The local competitor had a smaller selection. Cable pay-per-view was expensive and limited. Buying VHS tapes or DVDs outright cost $15 to $25 per title. Blockbuster had a monopoly, and monopolies don't have to care about customer satisfaction. But in 1997, a software engineer in California was about to prove them wrong. The legend goes like this. Reed Hastings, a successful software entrepreneur who had recently sold his first company, rented Apollo 13 from Blockbuster. He forgot to return it. 6 weeks later, he found the tape in his house and realized he owed $40 in late fees. He was embarrassed. He didn't want to tell his wife. And in that moment of frustration, he had an idea. What if there were no late fees? That story, whether entirely true or slightly mythologized, became the founding narrative of Netflix. Hastings partnered with Mark Randolph, a marketing executive with experience in direct mail, and together they launched Netflix in August 1997. The business model was simple. Customers would order DVDs online, receive them in the mail, watch them at their leisure, then mail them back in a prepaid envelope. No late fees, no due dates, no guilt. It was a direct attack on Blockbuster's most hated feature. But there was a problem. It didn't work. The initial model, pay per rental by mail, was clunky. Customers had to order DVDs one at a time, wait for delivery, then wait again after returning them to order another. The experience was slow, inconvenient, and expensive compared to driving to Blockbuster. By 1999, Netflix was losing millions. They had fewer than 300,000 subscribers. Revenue was anemic. The dot-com bubble was starting to deflate, and investors were getting nervous about unprofitable internet startups. Hastings knew they needed to pivot, so in September 1999, Netflix introduced a revolutionary new model, the subscription plan. For $15.95 per month, customers could rent unlimited DVDs, keep them as long as they wanted, and have up to 3 discs at home at any given time. No late fees, no due dates, just a flat monthly subscription. It was genius. Suddenly, Netflix wasn't competing on convenience. They were competing on value and freedom. A Blockbuster customer might rent 4 to 5 movies per month and pay $20 to $25 with late fees. A Netflix subscriber could rent dozens of movies per month for the same price with zero anxiety. Subscriptions grew. By late 2000, Netflix had over 300,000 paying subscribers, but they were still bleeding cash. The dot-com crash had arrived. Investors were panicking. Netflix was burning through funding with no clear path to profitability. So, Hastings and Randolph flew to Dallas to offer Blockbuster a lifeline. Buy us. Let us handle online rentals while you dominate retail, and Blockbuster laughed them out of the room. To Blockbuster's executives, rejecting Netflix made perfect sense. First, the numbers didn't lie. Blockbuster had 9,000 stores and 60 million customers. Netflix had 300,000 subscribers and no physical presence. Blockbuster's annual revenue was approaching $6 billion. Netflix wasn't even profitable. Second, Blockbuster had already tried online rentals and failed. In the late 1990s, they launched Blockbuster.com, offering DVDs by mail. But the service was poorly marketed, clumsily executed, and treated as an afterthought by executives who were laser-focused on retail expansion. Third, and this was the real killer, Blockbuster's entire financial model depended on late fees and retail foot traffic. If customers could rent unlimited movies from home with no due dates, they'd stop visiting stores. And if they stopped visiting stores, impulse purchases would collapse. Candy sales, popcorn sales, new release upsells, all of it depended on getting customers through the door. And late fees, forget it. A subscription model with no due dates meant $800 million in annual late fee revenue would vanish overnight. Blockbuster's executives weren't stupid. They understood the threat, but they were trapped in a classic innovator's dilemma. The very thing making them profitable was the thing preventing them from adapting. So they made a calculated bet. Ignore Netflix. Focus on retail. Maximize store count, optimize inventory, and squeeze every dollar out of the existing model. It worked for a while. In 2002, Blockbuster reported $5.5 billion in revenue. Store count hit a record high. The company was still dominant, still profitable, still the undisputed king of home entertainment. But cracks were forming. Netflix subscriber growth was accelerating. By the end of 2002, they had over 1 million subscribers. Revenue was growing, losses were shrinking, and most importantly, their model was scalable in ways Blockbuster's retail footprint could never be. Netflix didn't need expensive leases. They didn't need thousands of employees manning cash registers. They didn't need to negotiate local franchise agreements or manage complex inventory across thousands of locations. All they needed was a warehouse, some distribution centers, and a website. And they were getting very, very good at logistics. While Blockbuster optimized shelf space, Netflix optimized data. Every time a Netflix subscriber rented a DVD, rated a movie, or added something to their queue, Netflix collected that data. They tracked viewing patterns, preferences, genres, and behaviors. And they used that data to build something Blockbuster didn't have, a recommendation engine. In 2000, Netflix launched Cinematch, a proprietary algorithm that analyzed user preferences and suggested movies customers might like. It wasn't perfect at first, but it improved rapidly. The more data Netflix collected, the smarter the algorithm became. This created a flywheel: better recommendations, more satisfied customers, higher retention, more viewing data, even better recommendations. Blockbuster had nothing like this. Their recommendation system was a teenager behind the counter saying, "If you like The Matrix, you might like Dark City." Netflix's algorithm was impersonal, scalable, and shockingly effective. Customers felt like Netflix understood them. They discovered obscure films they never would have found at Blockbuster. They rented more. They stayed subscribed longer. By 2005, Netflix had over 4 million subscribers. Their recommendation engine was driving 60% of rentals. They were no longer just a DVD delivery service, they were a personalized entertainment platform. And Blockbuster was finally starting to panic. In 2004, Blockbuster hired a new CEO, John Antioco, the same executive who had laughed at Netflix's acquisition offer in 2000. But Antioco was no fool. He'd watched Netflix's rise with growing alarm, and he knew Blockbuster had to respond. So in 2004, he launched Blockbuster Online, a direct clone of Netflix's mail-order DVD service. It was too little, too late, but it wasn't hopeless. In August 2006, Antioco introduced Blockbuster Total Access, a hybrid model that combined online DVD rentals with in-store exchanges. Subscribers could order DVDs by mail, just like Netflix, but they could also return those DVDs to any Blockbuster store and immediately exchange them for a new movie. No waiting for the mail. It was brilliant. For the first time, Blockbuster was leveraging its greatest asset, 9,000 physical stores, as a competitive advantage instead of a liability. Total Access offered something Netflix couldn't: instant gratification. No waiting, no empty mailbox anxiety. Just walk into Blockbuster, swap your movie, and walk out. Customers loved it. By mid-2007, Blockbuster Online had over 3 million subscribers and was adding customers faster than Netflix. Antioco was spending hundreds of millions of dollars on marketing, subsidizing subscriptions, and eliminating late fees to win customers back. And it was working. Netflix executives were terrified. Reed Hastings later admitted that 2007 was the most existentially dangerous period in Netflix's history. For the first time, they faced a competitor with deeper pockets, better brand recognition, and a legitimate competitive advantage. But Blockbuster had a problem, a big one, named Carl Icahn. Carl Icahn was one of the most ruthless activist investors in Wall Street history. He made his fortune buying stakes in underperforming companies, pressuring management to cut costs and return cash to shareholders, then selling his shares at a profit. In 2005, Icahn accumulated a 10% stake in Blockbuster and launched a proxy fight to take control of the board. His argument was simple: Blockbuster was wasting money. Antioco's strategy of competing with Netflix by slashing prices, eliminating late fees, and spending heavily on online infrastructure was destroying profitability. Blockbuster needed to stop chasing unprofitable growth and focus on maximizing cash flow from existing stores. Icahn's vision was clear: squeeze every dollar out of retail, cut costs, and return cash to shareholders. In 2007, he won. Icahn installed himself and several allies on Blockbuster's board. He pushed Antioco out and replaced him with James Keyes, a retail-focused CEO from 7-Eleven. Keyes immediately reversed course. He slowed Blockbuster Online's expansion. He reduced marketing spend. He reintroduced late fees in some markets. He shifted focus back to retail, betting that physical stores would remain dominant for years. It was a disaster. Blockbuster Online subscriber growth stalled. Customers who had switched from Netflix grew frustrated and canceled. Netflix regained momentum, and Wall Street applauded, because from a short-term financial perspective, Icahn's strategy worked. Blockbuster's operating losses narrowed, cash flow improved, the stock price stabilized. But Blockbuster's long-term survival was now impossible. Keyes had made a fatal bet that the future of home entertainment would remain physical retail. He believed consumers would always want to browse stores, that streaming was years away, and that Netflix's mail-order model was a niche product. He was catastrophically wrong. While Blockbuster fought internal battles, Netflix was preparing for the next war. In January 2007, the same month Icon forced Antioco out, Netflix announced a new feature, Watch Instantly, a streaming service that allowed subscribers to watch movies and TV shows directly on their computers. It was clunky at first. The selection was limited, video quality was mediocre. But it was a glimpse of the future. Hastings had been preparing for this moment for years. He knew DVDs were a temporary business. He knew bandwidth would eventually get cheap enough, internet speeds would get fast enough, and consumers would demand instant access. Streaming wasn't just an add-on, it was Netflix's endgame. Blockbuster executives dismissed it. Keyes argued that streaming was niche and that consumers didn't want to watch movies on computers. He focused on retail, on kiosks, on physical media. But Netflix kept improving. By 2010, Watch Instantly was available on game consoles, smart TVs, and streaming devices like Roku. Subscribers could watch thousands of titles instantly with no waiting, no mailboxes, no physical media. And the selection kept growing. Netflix struck licensing deals with studios, networks, and cable channels. They offered entire seasons of TV shows. They added documentaries, indie films, and international content. The recommendation engine guided users to content they never knew they wanted. And here's the thing, streaming had zero marginal cost. When Blockbuster rented a DVD, they had to buy the disc, ship it, manage inventory, and handle returns. Every rental had a cost. When Netflix streamed a movie, the marginal cost was nearly zero. Once they licensed the content and built the infrastructure, adding another million viewers cost almost nothing. This was a fundamentally different business model. Blockbuster was trapped in a high fixed cost, low margin retail model. Netflix was building a high margin, infinitely scalable digital platform, and the market was catching on. By 2010, Netflix had over 20 million subscribers. Their stock price was soaring. Revenue was exploding. They were no longer a DVD rental company. They were a technology company building the future of television. Blockbuster, meanwhile, was collapsing. By 2009, Blockbuster was in freefall. Store traffic was plummeting. Subscribers were fleeing to Netflix and Redbox, a cheap DVD kiosk service that rented movies for $1 per night at grocery stores and gas stations. Revenue was collapsing, and the debt was suffocating. Remember, Blockbuster had borrowed over $1 billion during its expansion phase in the 1990s. That debt was still on the books. And as revenues declined, servicing that debt became impossible. In 2010, Blockbuster filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The company tried to reorganize. They closed thousands of stores. They auctioned off assets. They tried to pivot to digital distribution. But it was too late. Consumers had moved on. The brand was toxic, and Netflix had already won. In 2011, Dish Network acquired Blockbuster's remaining assets for $320 million, a fraction of what the company had once been worth. By 2013, Dish shut down all remaining corporate-owned Blockbuster stores. The last franchise location, a single store in Bend, Oregon, remained open as a nostalgic curiosity, a monument to a dead empire. And Netflix? By 2013, they had over 40 million subscribers worldwide and a market cap exceeding $13 billion. But Netflix wasn't done, because Reed Hastings had learned something from Blockbuster's collapse. Never depend on someone else's content. Netflix's streaming library was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it gave them instant scale. They could offer thousands of titles without managing physical inventory. On the other hand, they didn't own that content. They were licensing movies and TV shows from studios, networks, and distributors, and those deals were getting more expensive. As Netflix grew, studios realized the platform's power and started demanding higher fees. Worse, studios started pulling content to launch their own streaming platforms. Hastings saw the trap. If Netflix remained a middleman, they'd be squeezed by content owners forever. So in 2011, Netflix made a $100 million bet that changed everything. They greenlit House of Cards, an original political drama starring Kevin Spacey and directed by David Fincher. They committed to 2 full seasons up front, an unprecedented move in television. Hollywood thought they were insane. TV didn't work that way. You made a pilot, tested it, then slowly ordered more episodes. You didn't spend $100 million on an unproven show. But Netflix had something Hollywood didn't: data. They knew exactly what their subscribers watched. They knew Kevin Spacey had a loyal fan base. They knew David Fincher's films performed well. They knew political dramas had high engagement. So they skipped the pilot. They made the bet. And in February 2013, House of Cards premiered, all 13 episodes at once. It was a cultural phenomenon. Subscribers binged the entire season in days. Critics raved. Netflix proved they could produce Emmy-worthy content. And more importantly, they proved that original content was the key to platform independence. Over the next decade, Netflix would spend tens of billions of dollars on original films, series, documentaries, and international content. They'd win Oscars. They'd launch global hits like Stranger Things, The Crown, Narcos, Orange is the New Black, and Squid Game. They became the most powerful entertainment company on earth. And it all started because Blockbuster refused to buy them for $50 million. Blockbuster's collapse wasn't caused by a single mistake. It was caused by a cascade of strategic failures, institutional blindness, and incentive misalignments. 1. The late fee trap. Blockbuster's dependence on late fees created a business model that prioritized short-term profit over long-term customer satisfaction. Late fees generated $800 million per year, but they poisoned the brand. When Netflix offered a model with no late fees, customers fled. 2. The innovator's dilemma. Blockbuster couldn't cannibalize its own business. Embracing online rentals meant destroying late fees, reducing store traffic, and undermining the retail empire that made them dominant. So they waited, and by the time they moved, Netflix had a multi-year head start. 3. The Carl Icahn effect. Activist investors care about quarterly returns, not long-term survival. Icahn forced Blockbuster to maximize short-term cash flow instead of investing in the future. His intervention killed Blockbuster's last chance to compete with Netflix. 4. The debt burden. Blockbuster's expansion had been fueled by debt. That debt became an anchor. When revenues declined, servicing the debt consumed cash that could have been invested in technology, infrastructure, or acquisitions. 5. The technology blindness. Blockbuster executives fundamentally underestimated how quickly technology would change consumer behavior. They thought physical retail was durable. They thought streaming was niche. They were wrong. 6. The timing trap. If Blockbuster had acquired Netflix in 2000, they might have survived. But they laughed it off. If they'd launched Total Access in 2002 instead of 2006, they might have crushed Netflix. But they waited. Every delay compounded their disadvantage. 7. The execution failure. Even when Blockbuster tried to compete, they stumbled. Blockbuster Online was poorly marketed. Total Access was undermined by cost-cutting. Keyes' retail-focused strategy was DOA. Blockbuster died because they were optimized for the past, not the future. And Netflix thrived because they were willing to destroy their own business model before someone else did. Blockbuster's death sent shockwaves through Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and corporate boardrooms worldwide. It became a cautionary tale about complacency, disruption, and the fragility of dominance. Lesson 1. Monopolies don't protect you from technology. Blockbuster had 9,000 stores and 60 million customers. It didn't matter. Technology, first DVDs by mail, then streaming, made their entire infrastructure obsolete. Physical assets became liabilities. Lesson 2. Customer resentment is invisible until it explodes. Blockbuster customers tolerated late fees because they had no alternative. The moment Netflix offered one, they fled. Resentment builds silently, then erupts all at once. Lesson 3. Short-term profits can kill long-term survival. Carl Icahn's focus on maximizing cash flow destroyed Blockbuster's ability to compete. Sometimes, investing in unprofitable growth is the only way to survive disruption. Lesson 4. Data beats intuition. Blockbuster's executives made decisions based on retail experience and intuition. Netflix made decisions based on viewing data, subscriber behavior, and algorithmic predictions. Data won. Lesson 5. Content ownership is power. Netflix learned that licensing content is a trap. True platform power comes from owning the content your users want. That lesson drove their $100 million bet on House of Cards and their transformation into a media empire. Lesson 6. Cannibalizing yourself is better than being cannibalized. Netflix was willing to destroy their own DVD business by investing in streaming. Blockbuster wasn't willing to destroy late fees and retail stores. One survived, one didn't. Lesson 7. Speed matters more than size. Blockbuster was bigger, richer, and more established. Netflix was faster, nimbler, and more willing to experiment. In technology, speed beats size. Today, Netflix is a global entertainment behemoth with over 250 million subscribers in nearly every country on Earth. Their market cap exceeds $160 billion. They produce hundreds of original films and series every year. They've fundamentally reshaped how humanity consumes media. Blockbuster is a punchline, a case study in business school lectures about what not to do. The last remaining Blockbuster store in Bend, Oregon, operates as a tourist attraction. People visit to take photos with the iconic blue and yellow logo, to reminisce about Friday night video rentals, to marvel at the physical artifacts of a dead industry. In 2020, Netflix even made a documentary series called The Last Blockbuster, celebrating the nostalgia while subtly reminding viewers, we won. Reed Hastings stepped down as Netflix CEO in 2023, passing the torch to co-CEO Ted Sarandos. But his legacy is secure. He built a company that survived the DVD era, crushed a retail giant, pioneered streaming, and became one of the most powerful media companies in history. John Antioco, Blockbuster's CEO during the critical years, has openly admitted he regrets not acquiring Netflix in 2000. He's said in interviews that Blockbuster's board and shareholders, particularly Carl Icahn, prevented him from making the investments necessary to compete. Carl Icahn made money on his Blockbuster investment. He sold his shares before the bankruptcy, and he's never publicly expressed regret. Because for activist investors like Icahn, short-term profits matter more than long-term survival. And that's the final lesson of Blockbuster's collapse. Incentives matter more than intelligence. Blockbuster's executives weren't stupid. They saw Netflix coming. They tried to respond, but their incentive structures, maximize late fees, protect retail stores, appease short-term shareholders, made adaptation impossible. Netflix's incentives were different: grow subscribers, reduce churn, invest in technology, own the future. Those incentives drove every decision, and in the end, incentives determined destiny. Let's return to that conference room in Dallas in 2000. Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph pitch Blockbuster on acquiring Netflix for $50 million. The executives laugh. They reject the deal, and in that moment, they seal their fate. Because Blockbuster didn't just reject an acquisition, they rejected a mindset. They rejected the idea that customers hated late fees. They rejected the idea that technology could disrupt retail. They rejected the idea that a small, unprofitable startup could threaten a $6 billion empire. They rejected reality, and reality crushed them. Today, that meeting is taught in business schools as one of the most catastrophic misjudgments in corporate history. It's ranked alongside Kodak, ignoring digital cameras, Xerox failing to commercialize the personal computer, and Nokia dismissing the iPhone. But here's the thing, it wasn't just one meeting. Blockbuster had 1,000 chances to adapt. They could have eliminated late fees earlier. They could have invested in Blockbuster Online more aggressively. They could have resisted Carl Icahn's pressure. They could have acquired Netflix in 2005 instead of 2000. They could have focused on streaming earlier. They could have struck content deals. They could have innovated, but they didn't, because they were trapped by success, by debt, by quarterly earnings pressure, by the psychological inability to abandon the business model that had made them dominant. And so they died. Not overnight, not in one dramatic collapse, but slowly, agonizingly, inevitably, as Netflix eroded their customer base quarter by quarter, year by year, until there was nothing left. In 2013, a photographer named Brian Ulrich documented the final days of Blockbuster stores across America. His photos show empty shelves, torn posters, discount signs screaming, "Everything must go." Employees standing in deserted aisles, staring at nothing. One image shows a Blockbuster storefront at night, lights off, windows papered over, the blue and yellow logo barely visible. A handwritten sign on the door reads, "Thank you for 25 great years." But there's no gratitude, just silence, just the hollow echo of a giant that refused to adapt. And somewhere in Los Gatos, California, Reed Hastings was preparing Netflix's next earnings call. Subscriber growth was accelerating. Streaming was dominant. House of Cards was winning awards. International expansion was accelerating. The future was theirs, because they'd learned the one lesson Blockbuster never did. In technology, you either disrupt yourself or someone else will. Blockbuster chose to protect the past. Netflix chose to destroy it, and that made all the difference. Blockbuster's collapse isn't just a story about a video rental chain that missed the streaming revolution. It's a story about institutional blindness, about incentive misalignment, about the tyranny of short-term thinking, about the psychological inability to let go of what made you successful, even when that very thing is killing you. Every industry has a Blockbuster moment coming. Taxi companies ignored ride-sharing. Hotels ignored Airbnb. Retail chains ignored Amazon. Banks are ignoring crypto and fintech. Traditional media companies are still figuring out streaming. Automotive giants are scrambling to catch Tesla. And somewhere, right now, a small startup is building the product that will obliterate an industry leader who's too arrogant, too comfortable, or too trapped by their existing business model to see the threat. The question is, which side of that equation will you be on? Will you be the executive laughing in the conference room, or the entrepreneur walking out with a plan to destroy them? Because Blockbuster didn't die overnight. They died the moment they laughed at Netflix. Everything after that was just paperwork.